Hello and welcome, One Piece fans. So, although we got to see Hawkins' form, we kind of got disappointed with this episode. But before I get into all that, let's start this review of episode 898. So, let me just start off by saying that I didn't dislike this episode. I think why I found myself disappointed after this episode was because for a while now, we've been hyped up on Wano, not only from the great content from the manga, but also from the really high quality of the previous episodes. So, the animation was perfectly fine in this episode. You could argue it wasn't as great as the other episodes, and there weren't as many great shots, but the animation wasn't the problem. It was pacing. The fight where Luffy and Zoro are fighting against Hawkins' minions, his buddies, that felt like it went on forever before anything actually happened. Which, again, it's not that it was a poorly animated fight. It just felt like it felt like a chore to watch that. Now, we did get to see Hawking's true form, the straw man, and that was beautiful, but I think part of why that wasn't as exciting to watch was because they spoiled it pretty bad in the opening. So by the time you see it in this episode, you've already seen it like at least 10 times probably. Having said that, I do really like the straw man. It was really cool to see in the manga, and I like how they've adapted it to the anime. The transformation was pretty cool to watch. It wasn't like a top 5 transformation, but it was still pretty cool. I like how they added the sound effect to the straw man, and I also really liked how they showed how it works when one of his buddies dies and then the little doll came out of his arm. I thought they did a good enough job of portraying the straw man. Again, I think what disappointed me about this episode was that the pacing was so slow. If you compare the last 2 episodes to the manga, it really hasn't been that long in terms of manga chapters. If I'm being perfectly honest, I don't know how exactly to feel about this pacing issue because there's so much that goes on in Wano in the manga that people have been complaining that Wano in the manga feels rushed, which rightly so. I don't agree so much as a lot more dramatic people do, but I do feel like there are moments where I've been saying to myself, it doesn't really feel like this was as developed as it could have been. I hope they cover it more in the anime with these little filler bits. Now, again, with this anime, they need to pace it right so that they don't catch up to the manga. But because they have to do that, we get episodes like this where by the time we're finished, it feels like almost nothing happened after almost a half hour of watching. One other thing that wasn't major, but I think contributed to my disappointment with this episode was there's been a lot of new music in this arc with the cutscenes, with that first episode where they had all that music. And then with this episode, while the animation was up to our new expectations, I don't think there was any new music at all, which isn't a bad thing. It's just with these first few episodes of Wano, they completely blew our expectations. So to come back to traditional music and what our expectations previously were is a bit of a letdown. Now again, it's not bad that they didn't have new music, but it's a letdown because it's an opportunity to keep up this hype. So where a lot of people were probably worried, where this hype was going to be hard to keep up, I think it's showing in this episode. Now, I don't necessarily think this is going to be a continuing trend. there's a lot more that's waiting to happen after this fight with Hawkins. So I think the hype will get relit in those bits, but I don't know. I think, again, the expectations set by these first few episodes work to make this episode a little more disappointing than I would have hoped for. But as I said earlier, I didn't hate this episode. I liked this episode. It was just, it didn't meet my Wano expectations. I already said I liked the Straw Man animation and how they adapted that, but I also liked the earlier bit with Zoro and Luffy where Zoro notices that Luffy has a named sword, the Nidai Kitetsu, although he doesn't know that yet. He just knows it looks like a famous sword. And Luffy just doesn't give it to him, which is a very expectable Luffy moment. I also really liked the bits with Luffy trying to use the sword and then he ends up just punching people with the sword in his hand. Again, I didn't like the first few minutes of this episode where they're fighting the grunts because it just wasn't very innovating. It didn't really do anything new, but I did like that part where Luffy's trying to act like a samurai and he keeps saying Dekozaro, and he himself, I think, is trying to live up to the Wano hype. So, while this episode didn't exactly follow with the quality as the previous episodes, I still like it. Now, that doesn't mean I'm discouraged for the future of the anime. I still think the anime will crush previous arcs, and I think it's going to be amazing. But I think they really need to work on pacing. Hopefully, the future episodes don't feel as slow as this, but we'll see. So make sure to subscribe to the channel if you want to check out my other reviews of One Piece. Like this video if you enjoyed what I had to say. Follow me on Twitter, and I hope to hear from you soon.